This is Spinosaurus, the dinosaur that beat a T-Rex on screen in Jurassic Park 3. That fight could never have happened, and for almost 100 years, no scientist on Earth had ever even seen this animal's legs. The story starts in Egypt, in 1912, in a remote stretch of desert called the Bahariya Oasis. A fossil hunter named Richard Markgraf was digging there, on commission for a German paleontologist named Ernst Stromer von Reichenbach. Stromer wasn't present for the discovery itself. He worked from a research base far away, and the bones were packed into crates and shipped to him, first across the desert by camel, then across the sea to Germany. Bahariya turned out to be one of the richest fossil beds anyone had ever found. Over the following years, Stromer would describe several enormous predators from that one patch of desert. A massive Carcharodontosaurid with blade-like teeth, a long-necked plant eater, and then, unpacked from one of Markgraf's crates, something Stromer didn't recognize at all. Vertebrae with neural spines over a meter tall, far longer than the bone of the spine they extended from. A lower jawbone lined with teeth shaped less like a typical meat-eating dinosaur's, and more like a crocodile's, straight, conical, built for gripping rather than slicing. Some ribs, a few other fragments. That was it. No skull, no legs, no tail. Stromer named the animal in 1915 Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, spine lizard, from Egypt. But naming an animal and understanding it are two different problems. With almost no skeleton to work from, Stromer did the only thing available to him. He compared the fragments to the large, two-legged predatory dinosaurs already known from North America and Europe, animals like Allosaurus. He assumed Spinosaurus followed the same basic blueprint, just scaled up and modified with that strange sail down its back, two legs. A deep, muscular body held roughly parallel to the ground. A tall sail, for display or temperature regulation. Nobody was sure. It was an educated guess, built on maybe 5% of a skeleton. For nearly 30 years, that guess sat quietly in a museum in Munich, the only Spinosaurus material in existence. Then came the Second World War. Stromer, by this point, was an old man who had already lost 2 sons in the First World War, and had publicly refused to dismiss Jewish colleagues from his academic positions when the Nazi Party pressured him to. He was pushed out of his post. And as Allied bombing campaigns intensified over Germany, he pleaded with the museum administration to move his irreplaceable fossils to a safer location outside the city. He was refused. On the night of April 24, 1944, a bombing raid struck Munich. The museum housing the only known Spinosaurus skeleton was destroyed, the bones gone. Everything Stromer had spent decades studying reduced to rubble in a single night. All that survived were his old photographs, a handful of sketches, and his written scientific descriptions, tucked away in journals rather than trapped inside the building. For the rest of the 20th century, that second-hand record was the entire fossil basis for one of the largest predatory dinosaurs ever known. Naturally, illustrators and paleontologists kept trying to fill in the blanks, using whatever new relatives turned up. In 1983, an amateur fossil hunter in England named William Walker found strange claws in a clay pit. They belonged to a new Spinosaurid, later named Baryonyx, complete with a long, narrow, crocodile-like snout, exactly the kind of skull shape Stromer's jaw fragments had hinted at. In 1997, another Spinosaurid, Suchomimus, was described from Niger by a team led by paleontologist Paul Sereno. Both of these animals were bipedal. Both stood and walked like ordinary large theropods. So, lacking anything better, artists kept drawing Spinosaurus the same way, just larger, tall, upright. A giant standing over its prey on 2 powerful legs. That image reached its widest audience yet in 2001, when Jurassic Park 3 put Spinosaurus on screen, walking upright, snapping the neck of a Tyrannosaurus in a staged fight scene. The filmmakers had consulted with paleontologists and used what was, at the time, a reasonable extrapolation from the available evidence. It just happened to be built on a skeleton that no longer existed, filtered through decades of guesswork from other species entirely. For an entire generation, that upright, land-dominant predator became the definitive image of Spinosaurus. Nobody had actually found its legs to check. That changed with a chance discovery in Morocco. In 2008, A local fossil dealer offered paleontologist Nizar Ibrahim a partial skeleton dug from a formation called the Kemkem Beds near the border with Algeria. Buried among the material were bones nobody had ever recovered before, sections of the hind limb, part of the pelvis, and pieces of the skull. Ibrahim knew immediately this could be significant. But there was a problem. Fossil sites in that region are often stripped by local collectors and sold off piece by piece to different buyers across Europe and beyond, with no record connecting them back to a single animal. Ibrahim spent years afterward doing detective work, tracking down where the rest of the skeleton might have gone, eventually locating additional pieces in museum and private collections that appeared to match the same individual animal based on bone texture, preservation, and size. At the same time, his team digitally reconstructed Stromer's long-destroyed specimen using the surviving photographs and measurements from 1915, essentially rebuilding a skeleton that had been rubble for over 60 years, using paper records all. 1. Combining the digital reconstruction with the new Moroccan bones, Ibrahim's team published their findings in the journal Science in 2014, and the animal that emerged looked nothing like the one from the movie. The hind legs were short, proportionally much shorter than in any other large bipedal predatory dinosaur, too short to comfortably or efficiently carry an upright animal that size across dry land. The limb bones themselves were dense and solid rather than hollow, a trait called osteosclerosis, more typical of animals that spend significant time in water and need heavier bones to counteract natural buoyancy, similar to what's seen in penguins and hippos today. The nostrils, meanwhile, sat further back along the skull than in a typical land predator, positioned in a way that would let the animal breathe comfortably even with much of its snout submerged. This wasn't the first hint that something was different about Spinosaurus either. Back in 2010, a French researcher named Romain Amiot had analyzed oxygen isotopes preserved in Spinosaurus teeth, comparing the ratios to teeth from known land dinosaurs and known aquatic and semi-aquatic animals like turtles and crocodilians from the same time period. The isotope signature in Spinosaurus teeth lined up far more closely with the water-dwelling animals. At the time, that finding was treated as a curiosity. After 2014, it started looking like an early clue nobody had fully appreciated. There was also the matter of diet. The Kemkem beds where the new skeleton was found have produced an enormous number of Spinosaurus teeth, far more than would be expected from a purely terrestrial hunter passing through occasionally. Alongside them, researchers have found remains of giant sawfish and coelacanths, ancient fish that could grow several meters long, some bearing tooth marks or found in close association with spinosaurid remains. The straight, conical, interlocking teeth that Stromer had puzzled over back in 1915 turned out to be very well suited to gripping slippery fish, not slicing meat off of struggling land prey. Then, in 2020, Ibrahim's team added one more piece to the puzzle. Excavating further at the same Moroccan site, they recovered a nearly complete tail, something that had never been found for this species before. It wasn't shaped like the stiff, narrow tail of a typical predatory dinosaur, built mainly for balance while running. This tail was tall and flexible along most of its length, with long spines extending from each vertebra, giving it a broad, fin-like profile, closer to the tail of a newt or a crocodile than anything seen before in a large theropod. To test whether that shape actually worked for swimming, the team built a physical model of the tail and, alongside engineers, tested it moving through water in a lab setting, comparing its thrust and efficiency to the tails of known land-dwelling dinosaurs and modern aquatic animals. The Spinosaurus-shaped tail dramatically outperformed the land dinosaur comparison, generating far more propulsive force with each sweep. It behaved, mechanically, like a paddle. With the short legs, the dense bones, the isotopes, the retracted nostrils, the fish-heavy diet, and now a paddle-shaped tail all pointing the same direction, the reconstruction shifted dramatically. Spinosaurus was redrawn low to the water, body held horizontal, tail doing much of the work of propulsion. An animal that didn't just wade at the water's edge, but actively pursued prey while swimming. But the story still isn't settled. In 2022, Paul Sereno, the same paleontologist who had described Suchomimus decades earlier, published a detailed counter-analysis of the same body of evidence. Using computer models of the skeleton's center of mass and calculations of how the body would sit and balance in water, his team argued that Spinosaurus, despite the dense bones, would actually have been too buoyant and too poorly balanced to dive and swim after prey the way a crocodile or otter does. Instead, they proposed the animal functioned more like an enormous heron or stork, wading through shallow water on those short, sturdy hind legs, using its long neck and crocodile-like jaws to strike quickly at fish near the surface, rather than chasing them down underwater. Ibrahim and his collaborators pushed back, pointing again to the tail experiments and the bone density data as evidence for a more active, swimming lifestyle. The debate hasn't fully resolved. Even the sail itself is still argued over. Some researchers maintain it was primarily for visual display between individuals. Others still favor a role in temperature regulation, and at least one recent analysis has suggested the elongated spines might have supported a fleshy hump rather than a thin sail at all, more like a bison's hump than a fin. So, more than a century after Ernst Stromer first unpacked those strange, oversized vertebrae from a shipping crate in Egypt, paleontologists are still using the same handful of skeletons to argue over what kind of animal this actually was. A river monster that swam after its prey, a wading giant that ambushed from the shoreline, something that shifted between both depending on the season or the individual. Right now, there isn't a single answer that everyone agrees on. What we do know is that the version of Spinosaurus most people grew up with, tall, upright, dominating the land in a staged fight against a Tyrannosaurus, was built almost entirely on comparisons to the wrong relatives, filtered through a skeleton that had already been destroyed in a war before most paleontologists working today were even born. It took a Moroccan fossil dealer, years of detective work tracking down scattered bones, digitally resurrected photographs of rubble, an isotope study, a diet analysis, and an underwater tail experiment just to get this far. This is our best current reconstruction of Spinosaurus. And even now, the scientists who study it more closely than anyone else in the world still can't fully agree on how it actually lived. If you want to see the next animal we got completely wrong, subscribe and let me know in the comments which extinct animal you want covered next.